Hello, you're watching Context, and I'm Orkhan Amashov here to ask some pertinent questions in order to hear relevant answers. Although there seems to be a general consensus around the world, albeit with some reservations and caveats, of course, that the current system of international trade has created massive economic imbalances, not everybody is convinced that the imposition of tariffs is a way to deal with them. The Economist, for instance, has described Trump's sweeping tariffs as malignant stupidity, whereas others believe that these market clobbering measures are absolutely key to the US president's vision of reordering the world, and which, amongst other things, involve appending alliances, deepening the ongoing confrontation with China, and shaking the foundations of globalization, which Washington does no longer perceive as serving its best interest. On the other hand, the central question is how different actors, different countries, friends or foes, are going to respond to Trump's tariffs. Possible options differ in terms of their reactiveness, so to speak, from lying low, as the phrase goes, to outright retaliation. Interestingly enough, Elon Musk, a close advisor to President Donald Trump, recently expressed his hope to see a zero-tariff situation between the United States and Europe, saying that ideally a free trade zone between these two regions, North America and the continent, should be established in the fullness of time, and sooner the better. In this regard, there are those who believe that although President Donald Trump genuinely believes that US should use tariffs to boost national economy, fundamentally speaking, in the long run, his aim could be construed as having a free trade agreement with America's main trading partners, and that the sweeping tariffs with crippling effects aim to achieve this fundamental objective. However, the critics of the current administration in Washington, D.C., and the critics of those trade policies implemented by this administration argue that basically the current developments signify the crystal clear end of US leadership in globalization, providing for Beijing fresh and unheard of opportunities to negotiate free trade agreements with other countries, eventually enabling China to play a pivotal role in terms of laying the foundations for and establishing a new system which will eventually replace the World Trade Organization. An extraordinary proposition to make, of course, yet perhaps this proposition is worthy of close inspection as well. And today I'm going to discuss this subject, which is a very complex subject, by the way, with my guest. And joining me today from Lisbon, Portugal, is political analyst Anewz. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Alex, Reporterfy, joining us from Chongqing, China. Well, welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much indeed. Anewz, my first question is going to be addressed to you. Effectively, I'm asking this question, I'm putting this question to both of you. But first, let's clarify this element about the 10% universal tariff. I would like to begin by asking a very basic and perhaps somewhat naive question. What is the point of imposing a 10% tariff on all nations, irrespective of whether US has actually a trade deficit with them or not?
Well, this is a baseline. So basically, the United States has prepared a strategy that aims at dealing with the geopolitical massive change which is related to China's ascent into world power. So, as a baseline, the United States is stating that its external deficit is straight on in regard to all countries, which obviously is not correct. But then, on top of that baseline, then we have massive differences, and these differences really relate directly to what precisely the US goal is, which is to try and rebalance China's now bipolar stand, China's stand as a great power, both in economics, trade, technology, and security, and also to balance again its relations in energy fields. So what we can say is that there are two major pillars that President Trump is concerned about. One is security and the critical materials that are needed for security, The second one is not only agriculture at the domestic level, but also rebalancing who is with what role at the global level. And so that's the purpose. So on top of the 10%, then we have different layers which fulfill this strategy.
Alex, Reporterfy, the self-same question is addressed to you.
You know, trying to take the current administration serious is, a long stretch. If we look at the Americans, what they have done over the last couple of weeks, they pretty much wheeled out a high school project in front of the global world here. And if you look at the trading partners and the relationship that America had before this, it was quite good. There was a free trade agreement in place, and that was with the United States, Canada, and Mexico, some of their biggest trading partners. They tore it during his administration. Coming into the second time round, they want to do another deal, and they want to do it on their terms. So we have seen this administration on a global scale here call people allies, but then again inflict, economic harm and economic or economies. The Americans aren't going to get very far with this. They could put 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, and no one is going to buy into this. And that's why we've seen China retaliate so hard. They have that ability to stand up and weapon, and we'll share that in a little bit.
Anewz, it would be fair to say that, and everybody knew, I suppose, the markets did not like the idea of tariffs, but they were bound to fall with every new tariff headline. And ultimately, the crash, according to some, is not as bad as it seems. In fact, the people are disputing the term crash. They're saying that what happened is a fall, it's a crisis of some magnitude, but we're not talking about crash because there's a certain percentage level, and that percentage level has not been achieved. Technically, so reaction has not so far amounted to what we may call crash. What is your reading of the way markets reacted to the latest measures?
Right. So we have different forecasts for how, for example, China will fare in terms of its domestic economy. And these forecasts range from 0.5% loss of GDP in the next year to 2.5% loss, which of course are quite different values. Now, my reasoning is first and foremost geopolitical. I'm not an economist, and so I will leave the economics reasoning to the economists. I would like to discuss, however, unintended effects that can happen on the geopolitical sphere. Because as we can see, China is very cleverly countermeasuring the tariffs by striking the heart of the US. So China is imposing its own retaliatory tariffs on cars, coal, oil, natural gas, and agricultural products. While we know that President Trump is extremely concerned with its agricultural sector because it's a key electoral constituency for the Republican Party in the US. And we also know from President Trump's latest statements that President Trump is also very concerned with energy. And therefore, President Trump has, for example, told von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, that the US would only consider making a trade agreement with the European Commission and withdrawing tariffs if the European Commission buys around $300 billion in energy. So what China is doing is that it is counteracting right at the heart of the critical interests for President Trump. So energy, agricultural products, and furthermore critical raw materials, because the defense industry and the military forces, apparatuses, depend a lot on rare earths, whose exports at the global level China controls. And amongst the retaliatory measures, China has banned the export of a set of 7 rare earths, which are critical for the production of aeronautics. So China is hitting at the military capacity of the United States, as well as at its energy exports and its agricultural exports. And we have also seen today that there are Republican congresspeople who are already pledging with President Trump for a withdrawal of tariffs because the midterm elections might be really harmful for these Republican lawmakers who see their constituencies harmed in terms of their trade. So agricultural constituencies. We've also seen that billionaires like Elon Musk himself are also trying to lobby for a withdrawal of the tariffs because Elon Musk certainly has lost a lot of money on this already.
Alex, Reporterfy, Elon Musk recently said that there should be a free trade zone involving North America and the continent, European Union. What do you make of that comment and the timing of that comment?
I mean, Musk's sales in the European Union are plummeting. He's having a tough time. He's having a difficult time selling his Teslas. I mean, we're talking basically of a country, we'll call them the bullies, are being dragged out of the schoolyard. And no one's there to support them in what they're doing. So not only are we seeing, the United States be cleverly defeated here, but also the European Union, who they call allies and who he has tariffed and who he has demanded that they increase military spending, are basically shame. Now, we have to look at what China is doing here. China has cleverly, over the last few years here, built the Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI has connected 154 countries around the world, especially if we look at the continent of Africa. We see what China is doing down there, where many nations like France and the United Kingdom and the United States have turned their back on Africa over the last couple of decades. Well, China has gone in there, built the infrastructure, built the business, and it can easily sell to another 154 countries around the world here without any tariff issues. So right now, it's basically the United States against the world, and that is not a great place to be in, and especially if you're Elon Musk and trying to sell new energy vehicles when China is clearly the dominant player.
And back to the original point, actually back to the introduction of mine, wherein I said that there seems to be general consensus and of course this consensus is subject to limitations and caveats and so forth, that there are huge economic imbalances within the international trade system. That is recognized by everybody, but not everybody is convinced that imposition of trade, a tariff policy is ideal way of dealing with it. What is your take on the ways in which these imbalances could be addressed effectively and more sensibly? Anewz first, please.
Right. Well, what we saw with President Biden was already quite a notable concern with the trade deficit with Asia and China in particular. And so President Biden took a different approach. So he tried to protect to stimulate the semiconductor industry and to create the CHIPS Act. So he used industrial policy to stimulate the re-emergence of a domestic industrial activity in critical sectors. Whereas President Trump, instead of focusing mostly on industrial policy, is actually directing its targets through trade policy and using trade policy as a weapon for negotiation. And so this is clearly visible if we think about the European Union, because he first says he's going to implement these tariffs, and then he opens the door to, oh, if you buy energy from us, and a lot of it, we might withdraw this policy. And so the trade policy is used as a weapon in terms of global reach and the global race vis-a-vis China. And this is where I see the big difference, that President Biden maintained the first round of tariffs that President Trump imposed during his first mandate. And so by the start of this year, 2025, China was, for example, taxed by the US in 20%. And then President Trump introduced 2 times extra tariffs of 10%, which were related in his discourse with the fentanyl trade and the opium addiction, which for him is and was already in the first mandate a national emergency. So by the time our year started, we already had a baseline of tariffs with China, which President Biden had not dismantled. And so the difference is that whilst President Biden was really concerned with the possibility that China will block Taiwan in the next 6 months, which a number of analysts are forecasting, and therefore President Biden focused on replacing imports from Taiwan by stimulating industrial activity in the semiconductor industry at the domestic level. Now President Trump does this as a trade war. And so this is a Republican dramatic and drastic means which really diverges from the Democratic ideology.
There are those who would say that there's no winner, there are no winners in trade wars. Alex, Reporterfy, I'd like to effectively put to you the self-same question. What are the most effective ways in general to deal with huge imbalances in the trade system, as opposed to tariff imposition?
With this whole word trade balance, and you have to understand how it's calculated. The Americans always scream that, oh, you know, China has a larger, deficit, and we have a trade balance imbalance of 500, 600, 700 billion dollars. What are we going to do about it? Well, we have to understand that America imports to export. In fact, their automotive industry, they will bring in parts, they will assemble them in Detroit, and they will export that, not necessarily to the same country. So of course you're going to have an imbalance if you're buying a lot of the goods for your automotive business or your computer chip business or your solar panels or your wind farms or even coal. You bring that in, and some of these companies actually turn around and export it. No one's talking about the surplus that America runs on other countries. No. It's China, China, China. China's the bad guy. We got to get China here and China there. The Chinese are going to continue to move forward. This is not the same China as it was 30 years ago. The infrastructure is very strong here. The industrial lines are very strong. The manufacturing is very strong. And it is the warehouse to the world. So if America wants to try to balance their imbalance, well, we're going to be, SAC is not going to China. The check is coming right to the American consumer, to the tune of 50% or 54% right now. And if it's highlighted up to 104%, the Chinese are saying, bring it on, we're ready.
Okay. Well, beyond the scope of the US-China confrontation and trade war between them, I'd just like to ask my last question about Europe-US relations. Britain is not a member of the European Union, but Britain also was subjected to 10% tariff. And it has been said that some negotiations surrounding free trade agreement are underway. I mean, there's no trade deficit from the US perspective when it comes to the US-UK relations. What is the rationale there? Anewz?
Okay. Well, I think the UK is showing a very smart geopolitical strategy. Actually, this is a strategy that once again tells us that when some cry, others sell tissues. And in international relations, if one is smart, one can actually gain at the regional level from balancing between these rivals. So quite ironically and paradoxically, the fact that the UK does not belong to the European Union has, for the first time, probably had a positive aspect, which is that it allowed the UK to play a mediating role with the United States. Also, we know that Britain, the UK, has very close security and information links with the US, which are unparalleled in Europe. And the UK has always played such an important role in aligning with the US at NATO and other initiatives in the military field. So I think that the 10% is part of that baseline rule that we are concerned here. It's more of a narrative. We are concerned here with our position at the global level. And so we have these very baseline, very equal cutting through narrative of external tariffs. But then this will be easily worked around according to the country at stake. Also, one needs to see exactly what the exports are from Britain to the United States and how much that kind of exports will be actually affected. Because, again, this is economics and I'm not an economist, but it's a very basic knowledge that different segments of exports are not impacted in the same way with a specific tariff, especially if that tariff is not very high. So I would say that, again, if Sir Keir Starmer maintains his posture, he is in a very privileged place to deal with these armes de force. In the same way, for example, that Southeast Asian countries can now benefit if they know how to play the rivalry between the great powers. So we will now see regional little powers, let's put it this way, being able to make the best of it, to sell their tissues whilst the others are crying.
Alex, Reporterfy, what do you make of the UK's posture, if to use the language employed by Anewz?
Irrelevant. United Kingdom has really fallen as they brought in Brexit. You can see Prime Minister after Prime Minister after Prime Minister after Prime Minister has been replaced, and repeated and repeated and repeated. This is a clear example that the country is in disarray. They want to align themselves with America, the United States of America, that have brought them prosperity, so much to the tune that they're involved in this tariff trade war as well. You got to also remember that the United Kingdom is not necessarily playing ball either. They may have a 10% tariff, but they also have a value-added tax. And President Trump is wanting to go after the VAT. Every fifth iPhone that is sold in the United Kingdom and the European Union is tax revenue. 1 in 5, 20%, do the math. So every fifth iPhone that's sold, it's basically the government's. And well, if you have a company like Apple or other companies, it's pretty staggering what can happen. Now, how China can counter this is they can easily go after the digital companies like Microsoft or Apple Play Stores or that, Google's Play Store, and they can put a tariff or even a tax on that as well. So I think the Americans, they were, I guess, a little, that's because they've seen that has gone into a tailspin since it's had Brexit. And well, you can see it's a long way to go for the UK.
Well,
I wish them well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to both of you. Anewz, Alex, Reporterfy, thank you very much for your patience and time and for very detailed answers. Thank you to both of you. We'll discuss today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you indeed. Yes, we discussed the latest developments taking place around the world with particular focus on the sweeping tariff measures imposed by the administration in Washington, D.C. The very different countries around the world have been reacting to those measures. And of course, we also discussed long-term implications, primarily in the context of wider US-China confrontation and trade war between those two countries. You were watching Context, and see you very soon indeed.